Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode in our exploration of the Hughes Hubbard and Reed 2024 FCPA alert. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Tamara Kraljic. Tamara, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate being here.
Tamara, as I've told your colleagues, this is literally one of my favorite law firm alerts around FCPA and anti-corruption each year. First and foremost, because you're the first. And I get it in 2024 or the year. So it's a great resource tool for me over the month of December. But equally importantly, with the hard-bound version or the bound version that you firm releases or will mail to people, I can use it as a resource throughout the year. And I'm going to visit with you today on some of the international developments or key international developments that you've seen, and maybe sprinkle in some ESG, because that to me is going to be one of the most interesting issues going forward, given the dichotomy between the incoming administration and the rest of the world on that topic. With that long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome. And could you tell us a little bit of the key highlights you saw in international anti-corruption enforcement in 2024?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tom. And I'm excited to be on this podcast. So yes, we're excited to bring out a 2024 version of the alert. And as always, we have a chapter there on international, an update on selected countries, because obviously you can't do FCPA without looking around the globe. And we have a few countries that we highlight in our chapter 3 of the alert, including Brazil, France, and the UK. I'll speak a little bit about Brazil and France, but feel free to check out our alert for more details. So let's talk a little bit about Brazil. Should we start with Brazil?
You bet.
Okay, great. Brazil. We always give a quick enforcement climate update. 2024 has been relatively quiet for Brazil. There's been no multi-jurisdictional enforcement effort similar to what we've seen in 2022 with Glencore in Brazil. That's okay. I mean, that's not necessarily indicative of priorities having changed with the new administration. I mean, Lula took over again in January 2023 from Bolsonaro. And in Bolsonaro's administration, we had also seen that the major push for enforcement was in the last 2 years of his administration. So we can expect maybe to see the same thing here with Lula's administration. Also, maybe another factor to consider go ahead. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, great. Another thing to consider here too is that Brazil continues to struggle a little bit with the aftermath of the Operation Car Wash. So you have internal turmoil there politically, people getting absolved, court decisions relating to Operation Car Wash. So maybe the priorities there were more internally focused, trying to figure that part out rather than looking to enforcement on a multi-jurisdictional scale. But one thing to mention here that we highlight in our chapter 3 in our alert is 2024 marks the 10-year anniversary of the Clean Company Act. And for those who need a little refresher, the Clean Company Act, also the CCA, is Brazil's major anti-corruption legislation that entered into force in January 2014. So with 10 years of enforcement under the Clean Company Act, the main anti-corruption body in Brazil, the Office of the Comptroller General, also called the CGU, enacted a couple of measures, which I'll talk about. But I think it's worth just highlighting some numbers here from the 10 years of the CCA. In the 10 years, there have been over exactly 29 leniency agreements concluded in Brazil that total about $3.5 billion US. That's about 18.5 Brazilian real. So that just kind of gives you a picture. And unless you have enough question, maybe I'll dig into some of the 10-year anniversary initiatives by the CGO.
Yes, but that was exactly what I was going to ask you about with its updated integrity program.
Exactly. So there's two initiatives that I want to highlight here that the CGU has come up with for this not for the 10-year anniversary, but within the last year. And that is, first of all, in August of 2024, the CGU introduced a new alternative mode of settlement called the term of commitment. And so this is for companies that want to settle rather than litigate, but that are not basically eligible for the more traditional leniency agreement that is typically used in anti-corruption efforts in Brazil. So the term of commitment offers an alternative to companies, and it's newly introduced. And essentially, it allows for a 4.5. So there's a reduction in monetary penalties that companies can get by entering into the term of commitment. And the number here, I'm looking at my cheat sheet, is a 4.5 of a company's gross revenue. So that can represent quite a bit, a significant percentage of the total penalty. So that is sort of the carrot of the term of commitment. The stick is that the CGU, before entering into a term of commitment with a company, can decide to impose that company needs to actually implement a compliance program. So as we all know, it's quite costly to implement a compliance program if you don't have one already. That's the stick part of the term of commitment. So that's one of the first initiatives. The new that's quite big, inserting a new kind of mode of settlement for companies that maybe weren't eligible for the leniency agreements. And the second initiative that came about a little bit later in October of 2024, the CGU updated its integrity program guidelines for private companies. So similar to in the US, you have the FCPA resource guide. That first came out in 2012 and then was updated, I think, in the second edition in 2020, if my memory serves. All right. So here, Brazil had similar guidance that was issued a year after the Clean Company Act was enacted. So the first set of guidance came out in September 2015. And now, about 9 years later, we have an updated set of guidance. And what's interesting here, I just want to highlight that, and that's where we touch on the ESG, is that under that set of guidelines, there's really a more expanded understanding of what it means for a company for company integrity, essentially. And it's no longer limited to anti-corruption, but is really broadened to wider ESG, so environmental, social, and governance standards. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I think this is highly interesting as we see this wider rift really in Brazil, but we'll also see later in France and Europe more broadly. In the world, really, many parts of the world, there's this big push for ESG, more reporting requirements, new sets of standards that are being issued on ESG. We're broadening here in Brazil the understanding of what company integrity means and broadening it to ESG versus the backlash we've seen in the US with for example, the struggles in course that we've seen when the SDC issued its climate reporting obligations. And of course, you mentioned the incoming administration, drill baby drill, being far removed from an ESG sort of agenda under President Trump. And so that'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out also between the relationship between Brazil and the new administration under President Trump. I just saw a little snippet of President Lula wanting in a CNN interview, wanting to remind President Trump to please treat this earth like it's our only one and that we are all inhabitants of this only world. So that was interesting. I mean, I guess until Elon Musk makes interplanetary life possible, that's the case. So we'll see how that all plays out.
So what did you see around developments from the country of France?
France, yes. So similar, let's stay on the ESG topic actually, because in France, also relatively slow year in enforcement, but also interesting parallel to what we've seen in Brazil, a new set of guidance issued by the Agence Française Anticorruption, so the main anti-corruption body there too. They have issued a new set of guidance on ESG, essentially. And the way this plays out, let's take a step back, is a couple of years ago, the European Union enacted the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which essentially, as its name says, imposed on companies that are part of or that are under the scope of CSRD reporting obligations with respect to sustainability data. And what is happening is that the scope of the CSRD, which has since then been transposed into French law, is much broader than, for example, the scope of the main anti-corruption law in France, the Loi Sapin II. So the CSRD has within its reporting obligations anti-bribery reporting obligations, and many companies now in France that were previously unaffected by requirements under the Loi Sapin II are now subject to the reporting obligations under the CSRD. And for that purpose, and in order to recognize and help the companies, the AFA has issued a set of guidance that just sort of explains that sort of gives very specific guidance how companies that are subject to CSRD can go about and report their reporting data.
Certainly the French made a huge splash several years ago with the Airbus case and really announced their presence on the international scene of anti-corruption enforcement. The Paris Olympics from at least the anti-bribery, anti-corruption perspective, I think we're viewed as a huge success and something that the French and Paris, of course, were very proud of. Do you see, or would you speculate that there will be continued enforcement from the French going forward?
I would suspect that there is, and it wouldn't. I mean, absolutely right. That I think that so far, everybody seems to agree that the Olympics have been handled magnificently by France, not only in terms of the show that they put on, but talking also about actually from an anti-corruption point of view. Again, the AFA issued just before the Olympics, I believe it was in March of this year, 2024. You'll have to check our alert to find the details, but they also issued guidance, again, a set of guidance on corporate sponsorships, which obviously is extremely relevant in the run up to the Olympics. Maybe some argue that guidance came a little bit late because, as we all know, the kind of sponsorships that are needed for the Olympics are secured long in advance, not just 2 months or 3 months before the start. But nonetheless, it's very helpful. I think that any set of guidance, we all know that companies generally speaking with our clients, any type of guidance that just fleshes out the letter of the law and really take companies by the hand and say, this is what this requirement means, this is how you can implement it, is extremely useful. So the AFA did that timely before the Paris Olympics with a set of guidance on corporate sponsorships. But to your question, whether I believe that France will continue to have a high priority in enforcement, yes, again, 2024 has been relatively slow. I mean, there's not been a major enforcement action. I saw just this morning that, fresh off the press, that the PNF, the Parquet National Financier, actually entered into a DPA with Areva, the nuclear company. I think this is just as of this morning. I believe that there's going to be a continued focus. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the years ahead, maybe we'll see a couple of matters coming out of the Olympics. As well as it was handled, of course, we know that nothing is ever perfect.
I'd like to end by asking a little bit different focus about France to move it from enforcement to really the overall culture of compliance. I started speaking in France about 10 years ago, and in many ways, the compliance community was a voice in the wind saying, this is coming, and business people going, no, it's not, no, it's not, no, it's not. We're France. That obviously has changed. And so, do you see the message of compliance or the message of doing business ethically and in compliance something that's resonating with either French corporations or companies doing business in France?
Yeah, thank you for that. I could not agree more that, I mean, I see that it has changed. I started advising French companies in 2013. And yes, that was 3 years before Loi Sapin II. I think then anti-corruption efforts were generally seen as something imposed by the bad American law firms, and you had to comply with it. There has been a sea change in terms of the perception of anti-corruption efforts in France. And really, to France's credit, coming from both ends legislation, Loi Sapin II, but also there's the duty of care law from 2017, I believe, where there are also reporting obligations and matrices that need to be drawn up and risk assessments that need to be drawn up. AFA has been very active. Generally, all the enforcement authorities in France have been very active. As you said, there were highlights with Airbus, and that was just such a landmark case. All of this in the last 10 plus, really 10 years, has fundamentally changed the way companies perceive anti-corruption efforts. And they have started to realize this is not just something that is imposed by the US. It's not just something that is used to eliminate French competition, that in fact the world is going in that direction. And France, frankly, has been at the forefront of it in the past few years. So I absolutely see that change, both at the distant level of legislation looking at it, but also just in talking to my client and seeing the kind of reaction I get in when we do compliance reviews. There's a very different reaction and sensibility to it.
Tamara, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if any of our listeners wanted more information on the alert, to perhaps download a copy or to sign up for the bound volume, where can they go?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, you can find our alert on our website of hugheshubbard.com. So just go into our practice website of our FCPA group. You can download your free copy there. And you can see all the other chapters I didn't mention, so it's just highlights. We go into much more detail for Brazil, for France, and we also have a chapter on the UK in there. And then we have, of course, have many other chapters in that alert. It's a nice publication that has received good feedback from our clients and broader networks. So feel free to check it out.
Tamara, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it.